my name is Lucy and this is my Flosstube channel, Stitch to My Loop. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to everybody who watched my first video and to the folks who left a comment or shared about it on Instagram. It really means the world to me and I appreciate the warm welcome so very much. I hope that you enjoyed getting to know me a little bit and seeing my whips, and I hope you're excited to continue seeing more of my stitching. So thank you for coming back. If you're back for a second video, and if it's your first video of mine, thank you so much for being here. And today I'm going to be going through some of my finishes. I decided to split my finish parade into two because I feel like I have kind of two distinct eras of my stitching, and also I just have more finishes than I would like to talk about in one video. That would be a long haul. So today I'm going to talk you through my finishes, and as I do that, kind of talk through the story of my stitching and how my stitching style developed, and I think you'll be able to see kind of how I grew as a stitcher throughout, especially between the first era and the second era. So I'm going to talk you through my whips, or talk you through my finishes, and I'll tell you a little bit about them, and if I'm able to, I'll link the patterns below. And yeah, I would say that most of my finishes fall into one of three categories. The first being gifts. I really like stitching gifts. The second one, things that are fully finished and framed in my house and displayed in my house in some way. And then the third and probably largest category is the box, which I think a lot of stitchers have. I hope a lot of stitchers have. I hope I'm not alone in my box of shame. All the finishes that I have not fully finished or don't know what to do with. This first half mostly falls into the first two categories. It's mostly things that I gifted, which if I don't have the physical object with me, I have photos of most of them, so I'll put up a photo over here while I talk about it. And then the other category of framed finishes, most of this first half are finished in some way. But in the second video, we'll have a lot of just shoebox items. So I think with that, we will jump right into it. So I have been stitching since the summer of 2020, and the reason why I started is because my roommate who I was living with at the time was a stitcher, and we spent a lot of time at home together. It was COVID lockdown, so I just kind of was around her stitching and it piqued my interest. So we ended up going to Michael's and we got these Aida frames, and then I was able to use mostly threads from her, and I found some patterns that I wanted to do. So this is my very first finish. It is the Montana State Flower, and this pattern is from the US State Flowers and Counted Cross Stitch book. At the time I was living in Montana, and I was also born in Montana, so this was a special first stitch to do. I think it's very sweet. It's obviously not perfect. I started a little too high down here and then got cut off at the top, but it kind of reminds me that nothing needs to be perfect and that we all start somewhere. So I think this is a very sweet first project and I'm very proud of it. So I stitched that probably over the course of a couple of weeks in the summer of 2020. And I used this Aida frame. I think it's 14 count Aida, but I bought this at Michael's, and it's a wooden frame that has the Aida, I don't know, glued or stapled to it. And I think this is such a great beginner tool for getting people into stitching, because you don't have to worry about squeezing fabric into a hoop and getting your tension right. And then also you don't have to worry about FFOing it. It just, once you're done stitching, it's already in a frame and it's ready to hang up. So I think this was an amazing beginner tool, and I recommend it if you're trying to get any friends into stitching. But these are sold in a 3-pack, so I stitched 2 more state flowers once I finished the first. And those were the Washington State Flower, where I grew up, and then the Wyoming State Flower, where I went to college. So I have these set. I usually have these hanging vertically like this. I haven't found a place for them yet in my new house, but I will display them together. And then I'm also planning to stitch the Oregon State Flower soon once I'm able to get my hands on that book. I'll show my backs. I think these are also a representation of progress. This is my first one. Not too bad. This one I got a little a little out of hand. I clearly did not want to cut that yellow. It just was a few spots all over. And then this one is really funny to me. I just did not want to cut that thread. I'm a little better than this now, but I'm still not afraid of carrying a thread. Never hurt anyone. So yeah, those were my first 3 stitches that I worked on in the summer of 2020. And by the time I was done with those 3, I was completely hooked. I knew that I was in it for the long haul and that I was going to keep stitching. And I was just dreaming up all the different kinds of things that I would get, that I would want to stitch. So the next project that I picked out, I started just browsing on Etsy all the time and looking for projects to work on. And the next one that I picked to work on was Arches by Geekery and Stitchery on Etsy, which I worked on also in the summer of 2020. And I stitched this for my dad. And I think looking back, it was pretty ambitious of me to pick a full coverage for my second project ever, but I knew I liked stitching. I knew I wanted to do it for a long time, and I thought it was pretty, so I just picked it out and went to town. I used a circle frame, so yeah, I used a circle hoop instead of an oval hoop, so it looks a little different than the preview. But I stitched this for my dad and gave it to him. And another thing that you'll see throughout this video is that I am hopeless at finishing things. For that one, I just squeezed it as tight as I could in a frame and screwed it tight and then cut off the excess. So it will never be able to be reframed, but I think my dad has it hanging in his bathroom or something, so I think it did the job. I think he was touched that I made something for him. So then my next project was Hamilton Work by Best Coast Projects on Etsy. And I stitched this for my friend Elsa, who is a big Hamilton fan along with me. And this was right around when the recording of the musical was put on streaming. So I watched it like 3 times that summer and was really excited to stitch the Schuyler sisters. And this was a very fun one because it was mostly just block stitching, and I got to practice making my stitches a little bit neater or following a more defined path, fewer opportunities to be chaotic with my back. So yeah, I stitched on that in the fall of 2020 for my friend Elsa, and as most of the projects in this first video are, it was on 14 count white Aida from Michaels. My next project was Retro Yellow Camper by DJStitches on Etsy, which I also worked on in the fall of 2020, and I made this for my friend Sydney for Christmas. This one, so the benefit of using crunchy Michaels Aida is that it holds up pretty well. Like, it doesn't really need that much support to lay flat. So the way that I was framing these is I would just cut the Aida to the size of the frame and just stick it in there, and it basically, you know, it's like a piece of paper or a photo. It holds pretty, it sits pretty flat because it has no flexibility or give. So I just would stick them in a frame and send them off to my friends. So I don't know how they've held up, but I think they look fine. But once I learned that there was actual technique to framing cross stitch, I was a little embarrassed by how many projects I had just cut all of the margin off and just shoved into a frame. So now I know better, but for all of these, I did not know better. So my next finish was the KitchenAid mixer by DJStitches. I think it was originally charted in blue, but I was making this for my aunt who has a very beloved orange KitchenAid mixer, so I made it orange for her. And I worked on that in fall of 2020 and gave it to my aunt for Christmas that year. It was also on, you guessed it, 14 count Aida, and I finished it in a hoop, and I think she has it hanging in her kitchen. So that one was very fun. That was a lot of orange stitches. I don't think I looked at the photo on Etsy and I was like, yeah, I should stitch a KitchenAid for my aunt, of course. And I probably didn't think about how boring it would be to stitch thousands and thousands of orange stitches, but I have no regrets. So next up was this LaCroix can by DJStitches, which I stitched for my sister for Christmas that year. And it was also on white Aida. My sister's a big fan of sparkling water, so I was just trying to come up with as many projects as I could work on to stitch for people in my life because I wanted to stitch, but I didn't have any room to display stuff. And that one I think I just framed in a simple frame as well. And then the next one that I worked on was Yoga Poses by White Raven Patterns on Etsy. Worked on that also in the fall of 2020, and I gave it to my cousin for Christmas that year, who's a yoga teacher. And this one, I think I just used threads that I had, which was pretty risky given the fact that it's meant to look like it's overlapping. So that might have been a little bit risky, but I think it turned out pretty good. And that was probably my favorite project that I worked on. I just thought the colors were really satisfying and the effect was really cool. So I recommend that design. And then next up, I worked on the Geode by White Raven Patterns. And I also put that just in cut off all the margins, shoved it in a frame, and gave that to my aunt for Christmas that year. And my next finish was a Boho Rainbow by AnnettaShoppe on Etsy in the fall of 2020, which I stitched for my friend Taylor for Christmas that year. I just thought it matched her aesthetic and thought it would be pretty. And again, this one I probably did not realize how boring it would be to stitch, just back and forth and back and forth, but it was probably good counting practice for me. And then my final finish of 2020 was the Montana Night Sky by StitchesLoversShop on Etsy. And I stitched this for my grandparents who live in Montana. And I actually visited them last month and they had it hanging above their kitchen sink, so they look at it every day. And I was very touched that they have it so prominently displayed. So that's the end of 2020. I was so proud to gift everybody their customized cross stitches for Christmas. I really enjoyed, shopping around Etsy and finding patterns that reminded me of specific people in my life and stitching them up for them. So that was a really exciting Christmas to get to give them to everybody and hear what everybody thought of them. And at this point I'm fully in on stitching, but I think I slowed down a little bit after Christmas because I didn't have that deadline. And also I had finished projects for pretty much everybody in my life. So I was like, well, I didn't have anybody in mind that I could stitch a project for. So I just was stitching for the sake of stitching, which I was less interested then. I was more interested in giving gifts, but now I have no problem just stitching for the sake of stitching. But my next finish wasn't until April of 2021, which was the Big Green Succulent. I don't know if that's actually its name, but that's what I have it labeled. And this was by Hipster Stitch Inc. on Etsy. And I worked on that from November of 2020 until April of 2021. I think, again, I just slowed down my stitching a little bit after I finished all those Christmas presents. And also, this design had so much green in it. I don't know if you can tell from the photo, but it was a 10-inch hoop that I was stitching it in. So this was thousands and thousands and thousands of green stitches. And I think I just lost a little bit of motivation working on something that monotonous. But I do think it looks really cool. I could imagine someone with more sewing prowess than me making it into a really big cushion, like a giant pin cushion or just a giant round pillow. That would look really cool. But I ended up giving it to my friend Sydney, and yeah, that was also on White Ada. After that, again, I slowed down my stitching a little bit. So my next project was in the summer of 2021. My friend who I had originally given that Boho Rainbow stitch project to, she asked if I could make the circle Boho Rainbow. They were kind of sister patterns from that same Etsy shop, AnnettaShoppe. So, and I already had the colors that I needed because they were the same colors as the other ones. So I stitched that one for her. And again, I worked on that summer of 2020. It was on White Ada with Called for DMC. Shocking. And then my next finish was also in the summer of 2021. And I actually have this one here. Again, I don't know if this was a name, but I call it Big Sunflower. And this was from Talking Moths on Etsy. and I worked on it in summer of 2020, which was after I graduated college and as I was moving to Oregon to start graduate school. So this project is from a special time in my life. And I have this I usually hang this on like a gallery wall in my house. I haven't figured out exactly where it's gonna go in my new place, but it's on kind of a tan Aida, so we've gotten a little more interesting from just white Aida. But I think it's really beautiful. I think it's a really cool pattern and a really impressive amount of detail for not having any backstitch. And yeah, I'm really proud of this one. I'm very proud to have it hanging in my house. And back looks not too shabby. I did carry a little bit, but then I stitched over it, so no sin committed. Yes, like I think I said, this is from Talking Moths on Etsy. And then in the fall of 2021, I started grad school, and apparently I just forgot about stitching or didn't have time for stitching. I don't remember it being a conscious thing. I do remember finishing this right before I started school, and I don't remember consciously being like, all right, this is my last project and then I'm gonna take a break. But I guess I just got busy with school and didn't have as much free time to work on crafts. So that was my last finish of 2021, and then I didn't have any finishes in 2022. So my next finish wasn't until January of 2023, and that one was the floral uterus from StitchesLoversShop on Etsy. And I actually started this in 2021 but then put it down. I didn't work on it this whole time, but didn't finish it until January of 2023. And that one, I think I finished in hoop, and sent it to my friend who actually taught me how to stitch. I sent it to her for her graduation gift. And then my next project wasn't until April of that year, so I guess I took another little break after I finished the floral uterus. And that was the Pink and Green Succulent by DJStitches. And I obviously stitched this on black 14 count Aida. I think it looks so cool on the black with the pop. And I don't know if I bought the called for colors for this or if I just used what I had, but I think it looks so good. Clearly I do not have it fully finished. It just sits in this hoop, but I think I could just do a hoop finish on it and it would look much nicer and would be displayable in my home. But I love the colors on this one, and I love how it pops on the black fabric. So yes, I finished that in April of 2023, which coincidentally was right around when I finished my master's degree. And I suddenly had some free time again, and I was on the job hunt, but not working full time. And I remembered that stitching existed, and I went to town. So this was a nice kickstart back to stitching full time. And yeah, I'm so glad that I was able to come back to stitching once my life got a little bit calmer. And ever since then, I have not had a major break like that. So my next finish was a vegetable mandala by DJStitches. I think this was such a cute pattern. It's pretty tiny. I don't know if you can tell in the photo, but I think it was a 4-inch hoop. It was a pretty tiny hoop that I finished it in. And yeah, I'd never stitched a mandala before, and I wasn't sure how I would like the repeating patterns, but I think it's so cute, and I would definitely stitch it again. So I worked on that also in the spring of 2023 and gave it to my roommate. And then I was just having fun at this point, buying patterns on Etsy and stitching whatever. So I bought this Rickroll QR code by FaberCrossStitch on Etsy. And I stitched this just in one day. I just thought it was funny, and I knew I could find someone to give it to. So I gave that as a gift to one of my friends. I just put it in, again, just cut off all the margin and shoved it into a tiny Michaels frame, like the little 2x2 frames that they sell at Michaels. So I thought that one was very funny, and you know, it just filled one night of hanging out while I was job hunting. And then my next project was Taylor Swift Records by B. Francis Shop on Etsy. I worked on this from April 7th to April 8th of 2023. and I gave it to my friend Anna for her birthday that year because we were Swifties together. And it was also huge. I think I think I finished it in a 12-inch hoop. It's humongous. And if I were to stitch it today, it would need to be even bigger because there are new records. But I actually was visiting my friend who I gave it to at her house a couple months ago, and I saw it hanging in her kind of crafty area. So I was very touched that she had it displayed too. And then next up was, I don't know if this is the real name again, but I called it Rainbow Teacher. This is by the Reformed Sparrow on Etsy. And I worked on it from April 10th to April 13th and gave it to my friend for her graduation because she was studying to be a special ed teacher. So I wanted to give her something that she could use to decorate her future classroom. I love this one, and I would stitch it again if I had any other friends who were becoming teachers. So I highly recommend that pattern. Again, 14 count white Aida, shoved into a frame, cut off all the margin. It is what it is. And after I finished that, I stitched the Rickroll again because I just thought it was so funny, and it just was I wanted to experiment with the stitch path. So I think the first time I did it, I stitched just back and forth, and then the second time I did it, I stitched in a spiral. So I've always enjoyed playing around with stitch path, so I think that's why I was happy to stitch it twice. That one I also just stitched in one evening, and I gave it to my brother as a graduation gift because I thought it would make him laugh. And he actually had it displayed in his room last time I visited, so maybe he just put it out for me, but I was touched that he had kept it even. If you have a younger brother, you might understand. Okay, and then next up for my stitching, still in spring of 2023, I was unemployed, I had a lot of free time, and wanted to keep my hands busy with stitching, so that's why I have so many projects. I worked on these hummingbirds by StitchesLoversShop on Etsy. I don't know if I'll be able to hold all three of them. They have this blue colorway, a rainbow colorway, and then a warm colorway. I don't know if, yeah, so these are all stitched on 14 count Aida with, I don't think I used the called for, I think I just used what I had, but inspired by the called for. And at my old house I had these hanging along the stairwell. I thought it looked nice kind of in a diagonal together, and I don't know what I'll do with them at my new house, but I have them framed in these 8-inch, I think, Michaels frames. And again, I just chopped the Aida and shoved it in here, and it works pretty fine because the Aida is so stiff and crunchy. Yeah, I think those are I think they're really pretty. They are quite large, so I need to find the right space to display them. And then next up was Hobbit Meals. This pattern is from Allerton Embroidery, and I stitched that for my roommate that I lived with in April of 2023 for her birthday, because she was a big Lord of the Rings fan. She still is, she's just not my roommate anymore. And it was very sweet. She hung it up in our house after I gave it to her, and then I visited at her new house and she still had it hanging. So again, I think stitchers will probably agree, it's very touching when someone displays your artwork. It's gratifying to know that someone appreciates it and wasn't just like, what is this thing you gave me? They appreciate the artistry. So that was another finish. And then my next project was Abstract Flowers by BoxAndFox on Etsy. And I worked on this from April 30th, 2023 to May 31st, 2023, which in hindsight was pretty dang fast, but I think this style of this pattern lends itself pretty well to stitching fast. I just stitched all the black outlines and then just filled it in like a coloring page. Got to practice some block stitching. And this one I actually did in the called for colors because I thought the preview looked so pretty, and I think it's really cool. It reminds me of a coloring page, or a page from a coloring book or something like that, but I have this hanging in my entryway. And yeah, I think it's so cool. And this was my first taste. I guess my arches was full coverage, but this was my first conscious full coverage where I knew what I was getting myself into, and I loved working on it. And I remember thinking after I finished this, I was like, I need to stitch something bigger because I need to slow it down a little bit, because I can't just keep making stuff and then I'm gonna run out of room to hang it in my house. So I thought to myself, I need to slow myself down a little bit. I need a challenge. I need something that will take a little while so that I won't be just making all these things that I then have to find places for. So I was ready to undertake my first large full coverage. And again, at this time, I had no awareness of the world of stitching. I did not know that there were full coverage specific designers. The world I knew was Etsy and Michaels. So I shopped around on Etsy and I found this pattern for this Crater Lake full coverage. This was by Mom's Day Off on Etsy. And I bought it, and I bought all the threads for it, and I went to town. And this is, I think it's 200 by 300, so it's 60,000 stitches. I stitched it on, you're not gonna believe this, I stitched it on 16 count Aida because I didn't want it to be too big. I did not know there were other kinds of Aida, but I decided to branch out and stitch it on 16 count. And I stitched it with all the called for. I think there were 50 colors in this. And then I was so proud when I finished it that I decided to get it professionally framed. So I worked on this from June of 2023 until January of 2024. So it took me about 8 months to do, and I stitched on it pretty much every day of that time period. By the time I started this one, I did have a job, so I didn't have quite as much stitching time as I did during that spring. But it was my only project, and I pulled it out almost every single day. I'll give you a close-up. I'm so proud of this. And after I finished it, I decided to get it professionally framed, which was a big splurge, but I think it's so beautiful, and I have it hanging. I finally found a place for it. It'll be hanging behind me in future videos. And yeah, and last year I submitted it to the county fair, and I won a blue ribbon, so I'm very proud of that, and I have it displayed with this because I just think it's pretty cool. Crater Lake is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and I just was so amazed visiting it. I loved swimming there, and I thought that if I was going to spend a big chunk of my life on a project, I wanted it to be something that was meaningful to me. I do think this image was a little tough for full coverage. There's a lot of blues and a lot of tans in this middle section, but I didn't really care. I just wanted a bigger project to stitch on for a longer term, just for a longer term project to slow myself down, like I said. And yeah, so I feel like that 8 months that I was working on Crater Lake that's when I started watching Flosstube and learned about the online stitching community. And so as I was finishing up Crater Lake, I had a lot of ideas brewing in my mind, and I was aware of this whole other world of styles and designers and supplies. But I think that I will save that for the next video because that definitely represents a shifting of my style and my stitching perspective. But yeah, I think that is where I'll end it for today, and I'm going to try and film the second half of my finish parade soon because I have a lot more finishes that I'm excited to share. Most of those are not framed, so this first half, again, I don't know what got into me, but I have all of those pretty much finished. Probably because I didn't know what I was doing and I was just chopping them. I didn't actually take the time to pin them or finish them nicely, so it was very easy. But yeah, those are my finishes. I think that was about 28 of them, which is a little under half of all the projects I finished. So I would love to hear in the comments what your first finish was, if you can remember it, or an early finish, because I think it's so fun looking back and seeing how far we've come and how much has changed in our stitching style and our stitching technique. So I would love to hear that from you in the comments. And I'm gonna do my best to link patterns below, but if you have questions or want more information about any of my projects, feel free to comment or send me a DM on Instagram. Yeah, I think that will be all, and stay tuned for part 2.